We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was recorded, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
Around 7 months ago, Pat Farmer set off on a journey around Australia, starting in Tasmania and making his way to Uluru. It's a path that's well travelled, especially for an Aussie in their 60s. But Pat is no grey nomad. He's got no camper van, no car, he's not even allowed to hitchhike. He's taken every one of the 14,400 kilometres on foot. And he's not walking, he's running up to 80 kilometres a day. It's all part of the bigger purpose to support the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament. It's the latest in a long line of journeys that have seen Pat run hundreds of thousands of kilometres through some of the world's most inhospitable landscapes. I'm at Middleton and you're listening to Head Game. Today, what it takes to run extreme distances through some of the planet's deadliest conditions, propelled by purpose and driven by pain. Pat Farmer, great to have you on Head Game. Take me back, because you're a marathon runner, you're an ultramarathon runner. Do you remember the first time you put on a set of running shoes and thought, you know what, I love running? When did that passion first come into fruition?
Oh, it was through my later years. Well, when I say later years, I was 18, and I'll never forget, I worked as a motor mechanic at a garage out in the western suburbs of Sydney. I was inspired by a little old man by the name of Cliff Young, who ran on to win the Sydney to Melbourne race, a 1,000 kilometre race from Sydney to Melbourne. And it was the first runner over the finish line in Doncaster in Victoria was the winner. And so that meant that they were going through day and night and day. So sleep deprivation played an extremely important role in all of that. And what a lot of your listeners may not know is that you actually build up more stamina as you get older and more of an ability to cope with not only pain but also lack of sleep. And so that's why Cliffy was so good in that field, while the other greater runners than him, and when I say greater, some of these guys were capable of doing 240 Ks in 24 hours without a problem at all, 240, 250 Ks, even up to 300 kilometres later on in years. Giannis Kouros was first man to run 305 kilometres in 24 hours. So that was the calibre of runners in those events. But Cliffy had the ability to go without sleep and just punish his body and push himself through every mental and physical pain barrier that you could imagine. In fact, I saw in later years myself, when I was crewing for another runner, Cliffy's hip would often come out of place, and the physios would simply throw him down on the side of the road, push his hip back into place. He'd yell out a bit of a squeal, get back up and keep going on. And, to me, that was just the epitome of tenaciousness and strength of character and strength of mind, and the ability to get the job done. So he was such a great influence, not only for me, but indeed for all Australians.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I always say to people, they talk about my career in the military, and I say, with age comes endurance and resilience. Whether that's shaped through, a situation, whether that's shaped through your life experience, whether it's shaped through whatever it may be. But obviously, the longer you live, the more you put yourself and you commit to these situations, the more endurance you have and the more resilience that you have to be able to deal with the psychological, the emotional and the physical pain that you go through. It's just getting past those pain barriers, understanding your body and understanding what it's capable of. So he was, was he a mentor of yours? Did he first get you into running, or did he say, right, here's a pair of training, like, come with me? Or how did that first sort of pan out?
Well, the interesting thing about that was that I had, like so many young kids live in the suburbs at the time, we were always being put down. We're never going to amount to anything. As I said, I struggled to get an apprenticeship and finally got an apprenticeship as a motor mechanic. So when you look back on all of the things that I've done and see that's where I came from, it's quite something. But I think struggles in life are a good thing, and far too often we see that as so much of a problem and a setback, but it's actually if it's right and you're the right person, it's the sort of thing that makes you not only tenacious, but it also makes you determined, and it makes you fight for everything that you've got. So you don't take anything for granted, and you learn a lot more about yourself, and you find ways. You find what I call fox cunning, and it's a way to solve a problem without necessarily having the cash or the nous to be able to solve that problem, or having the the intelligence to solve it on an academic level. But you find a way to solve a problem and a solution, and what we don't realise is that's a very, very important basic instinct of life, to be able to survive and to be able to try and get ahead whatever way you can. And so you find out what suits you best. And so I found that the ultra running pushed me in that direction. I was already down that track. You know, I'd been told by so many people I was never going to amount to anything. I will never be anything. I haven't got any specialties in any field. But when I saw this little old man complete this very, very tough, long distance race, I thought to myself, if he can do that, then I can. And it's amazing because I've looked at so many Olympic athletes and fine footballers and cricketers and all sorts of different athletes, but I could never compare myself to them. But when I saw somebody ordinary doing something extraordinary, that's what fired me up. And that's what made me realise, yes, the tools are within me to do this. If he can do it, I can. So, basically I went out the next day, started running. I threw bricks in a backpack. I knew nothing about what I was. Old
school.
Yeah, very old school. I knew nothing about what I was doing. Knew nothing about food, nutrition, shoes, clothing, anything. I just ran. And in doing so, I punished myself, and by punishing myself, I learnt, and I learnt along the way. I just progressed over time. But I took the time to actually ask people, and that was one thing that was admired in the running fraternity. A lot of other people saw everybody else as competition, so they didn't want to let down their guard and they didn't want to ask questions. I asked a million questions about all the silly things, and I continue to. But in doing so, I learn.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a silly question, as they say. But I agree with you. Through hardship, suffering, and pain comes the most valuable lessons, and valuable lessons about yourself. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You realise what you're capable of. You realise that actually through commitment, you can achieve great things, and it's about those small commitments that build up to the bigger picture. So you go into running. Did you find that you love it straight away? Were you passionate about it straight away, or was there a time when you thought to yourself, actually, this isn't for me?
I never thought that it wasn't for me, but always felt it was hard, and it still is today. I've never done one thing yet that has been an easy road, or it's like, yeah, I'm going to win this race, and I walk in, I just win it, pick up the trophy, go home. That's it. It's always been a struggle. It's always been hard work. But, of course, I moved into ultras, which are not your standard marathon. They're everything beyond the distance of 50 kilometres. And in my case, my specialty is multi-day events. So when you're dealing with multi-days, you're dealing with different weather conditions, you're dealing with sleep deprivation, you're dealing with the ability to go through day, night and day, and also to have rest, but then try and get up and get going again after that rest. And anybody's ever had a workout in a gym, a serious workout in a gym, will know that the pain sets in after a day or two, and it is hard to duplicate what you did the first couple of days. But we have to do that every single day.
And when do you realise that you're actually good at running? You're actually learning a lot about yourself. You realise what you're capable of. Self-belief starts to kick in, which is a super important tool to give yourself, especially if you're going to set out on ultramarathons. You've got to believe that you can do it. You've got to trust in your body, trust in your equipment. When do you realise, God, this is something that I want to do. I love doing it, and I'm good at it?
Well, I got an invitation to go over to America and do the Trans-American Foot Race, which is a race that starts in California and finishes in New York. It's right across the country. It's 4,700 kilometres. There was 30 of the best runners from all over the world in that event. I went in it completely green, and I finished second in that event. still didn't know much about food nutrition. Not that that mattered too much, because every time I travel, you have to reinvent that whole nutritional base anyway, depending on what you can get your hands on in that country. Like I've run in countries like India and Vietnam and all throughout the North, South and Central America. And, if you're too fixated on your nutrition, then you're only going to get upset and you're going to have problems as well. So you have to be able to deal with sometimes not being able to get what you want. But so long as you understand the basics of what you need, you can survive, and that's the main thing.
I think sometimes when you go into these things, not naively, because you want to be as prepared as you can be, but without overthinking it, over-analysing things, is a case of, right, I don't look at the task in its entirety because it can be overwhelming, or it can stop you from committing to that race or to that run. Do you break things down? Do you just go in there and go, right, I'm just going to, how do you break things down in order to get to where you need to be, especially when you say it's multi-days? Surely you don't look to the 2-3 days ahead. You're like, right, I'm going to break this down and attack it commitment by commitment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's two most important steps that any of us ever take. One is the first step and the second is the last step. And the most important of those two is the first step, because often there's a lot of planning that goes into taking the first step. There's a lot of reassurance and understanding of what you're taking on. None of us can foresee the future and understand what problems could happen, and especially when you're dealing with completely different temperatures, weather conditions, and you might be in a race against people that you've never met before, so you don't know what they're capable of. So with that in mind, the only thing that you do have control over is yourself in the first step. So you do all the necessary planning to get you to the starter's line, and from there on it's just a matter of really focusing on a one step at a time approach. And I know that sounds like such a cliche, but
so important.
You achieve enormous tasks by breaking them down into bite-sized pieces. And like the old cliche goes, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time, and you take on a big task just one bite at a time, one step at a time. And if you make sure that you get every single step right along the way, then the end result will follow, and that's all there is to it. It's as simple as that. It's really breaking it down into bite-sized pieces and concentrating on the here and now, that particular day, not worry about 2 or 3 days down. Like people would tell me, the weather's going to close in, we're going to get a lot of rain, or things are going to change, or it's going to get extremely hot when you move in a certain area, blah, blah, blah. But
you deal with it when you get there.
Yeah, I'll worry about that when I come to it. So long as I know I've got the equipment that to put on, the jackets or whatever I may need. But aside from that, it's just I'm just focused on now, and I'll get the money in the bank now, make sure that I get the kilometres done now so that I'm ready to go for the next day, and then worry about it when it comes.
Yeah, and those small steps, once you're committed, you'll be surprised that through that commitment phase, you'll find a way through, right? It doesn't matter what hits you, it doesn't matter what's in front of you. If you overanalyze it and overthink it, like you just said, then that can stop you from even committing. But when you're in the moment and you're there, and it's almost, when you deal with the situation there and then, you've got two choices. You either don't deal with it and you stop, or you deal with it and you get through it. And 9 times out of 10, whatever's in front of you, you will get through it once you're in that commitment phase, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. You have to be there. I always look at everything. Well, if I'm at the halfway point, or if anybody's at a halfway point of a race, it's just as easy to push on as it is to go backwards anyway. So, you focus towards getting towards that halfway point, and then every single step then is towards a step towards the finish. You talk about setbacks and difficulties and all the rest of it. I did a run back in 2011, and it took me from the North Pole to the South Pole via the Americas. There's no way on earth that you could possibly plan everything that could possibly go wrong in those sorts of conditions. I mean, we're talking the North Pole minus 35 to 40 degrees. Some days were picturesque, just absolutely magnificent, beautiful days to look at. But still icy, freezing cold, and I didn't want to get my hands out of my gloves, which were inside another set of gloves, which were inside another set of mittens, just to be able to look at my GPS to make sure I was on course on a regular basis. And then because I didn't, often because the North Pole is this ice cube that floats on the ocean and is turning in an anti-clockwise direction, I'd be heading towards Greenland when I should have been going towards Canada, you know. So you quickly learn that you just have to deal with all the problems that go along, and you have to have the discipline and the ability and the tenaciousness and deal with the pain just to be able to keep moving forward. And to keep moving forward means to be constantly aware of where the finish line actually is.
How hard was that race?
That was, without a doubt, the most difficult thing I could ever possibly imagine. There's so many obstacles came up from the start. You know, we arrived there after a year's worth of planning and putting things together and trying to pull together the financials to make that happen. I'll never forget myself, my guide, Eric Phillips, and my cameraman arrived in the North Pole. We were dropped off there by Russian helicopter, and the first thing we had to do after we pulled all our gear out the back of this M10 helicopter was to fire a couple of rounds out of our 303 rifle and make sure it was functioning. It's mandatory you have to carry a rifle up there because of the polar bears. And we were right on the cusp of the season, so the end of winter, the start of summer, and you do it then because it's light enough to be able to traverse, but it's still dark enough and still cold enough that hopefully most of the polar bears are still asleep. They're still hibernating. So you get out, and I'll never forget, I got out there, and I'll just tell you one story which, you know, looking back on it, it's amusing, but at the time was painful. I just got off the back of this helicopter, pulled all my gear out. I had a sled that weighed 100 kilograms worth of gear. I weigh 65 kilograms, or I did when I started. I dropped down to 49 kilos by the time I hit Canada. I had a shot of the rifle. The recoil hit pulled on my finger, and I just felt like I'd just been hit with a cane, just been caned across the end of the fingers, just because it was so cold and it was painful just to fire that trigger, and just because of recoil on it. Then I felt to myself, I need to go to the toilet. I need to take a leak, and here I am out in the middle of nowhere, and so
can't feel your hand.
I couldn't feel my hand inside two sets of gloves and a set of mittens, and then of course all the gear that you have on. I started trying to find the zipper that had a little bit of line on it attached to my fly of my pants to try and do that. So I'm trying to get this glove off, and then I'm trying to find this zipper, and the more that I was trying, the more urgent this moment became for me to be able to urinate. I'm working away, and the more I'm working away, the more I'm getting anxious because I just had so many layers of clothing and all the rest of it. And this was just the start, and I'm trying, and then I start praying, please, let me, please, hurry up, like I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
And then I finally find this zipper, but it's too late, and I ended up urinating down my leg, which anywhere else is just a funny thing for somebody to do, and you don't think much about it. But up there, of course, the water freezes on your leg straight away.
Yeah.
So it turned to ice straight away, and I ended up with this blister that started at my groin and finished at my ankle all the way down. And that was just the start of the event.
Before you even started? That
was the start. And I was just thinking to myself, my God, what have I got myself into here?
So a great start then.
Yeah. So that was my first 5 minutes on the ice of this journey that was going to take me 39 days to get from the North Pole out to the edge of, out to Canada, out to Walton Island. It was the start of such an epic conversation between myself and my guide and my cameraman, because as you can imagine, I'd already paid all my money up front. I'd paid money to the Russians. I'd paid money to the guides. I'd paid money to the cameraman. Big dollars, big dollars.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's like somebody climbing Everest, the amount of commitment that they put into it all. So it didn't matter if things didn't work out 5 minutes into it. They were happy to pull the plug and everybody go home. They're already paid. But for me, this was the commitment of my life. I'd sold my house to try and cover off the expenses to do this and to be there and to do something nobody else on earth had ever done before. And consequently, I was faced with the reality of what I'd taken on right from the very first moment. So we got on with things and we pushed on, but there was many mishaps along the way.
How painful was it, and how did you use that pain to get through?
I'll tell you one story, I'll never forget it. I remember there was this one day, it was a particularly tough day for me, and I finally got inside my tent, and we had like a neoprene face mask that went over our face. We had, of course, hats, beanies, balaclavas, all the rest of the gear, the goggles, everything that you needed to keep the conditions away from your skin. I finally got inside my tent that night. When I say night, it's 24-hour sunlight, of course. Dug some snow, got some fresh snow to be able to boil up for water. Finally got inside my tent, got inside my sleeping bag. And I remember I would peer out of my sleeping bag and look at my jacket, my clothes there inside the tent, and they were just covered in snow and ice. And that was the stuff that you were going to put on to get warm for the start of the next day. So to look at that and to think that the only sanctuary that I had was inside my sleeping bag. And I'm inside this bag, and the night seemed to go so fast. It was ready the next morning. The wind was howling outside, and there's this incredible saying that they have, and it is, the storm is always loudest from inside the tent, which basically means that whenever you take on anything in life, it always seems so much tougher until you actually get out there and you start to do it. And then when you get out there and you get on with it, well, it is what it is, but you accept it and it's not so bad as they're preempting the fear of it all. So anyway, my crew were packed up and ready to go, and I had overslept, and I got up and I got out and I started getting myself dressed, and I'm racing around my tent and I'm looking for my neoprene face mask and I couldn't find it anywhere. And in my haste the day before, I didn't realise, but it had come off I'd taken it off my face, and I was grabbing something out of my sled and I'd left it on the sled, which meant that the next morning I peered outside the tent, and there was my face mask covered in snow and ice at the end. I quickly grabbed it and brought it back inside the tent, and I tipped some warm water over the top of it that I'd just boiled in a thermos, and I got some of the snow and ice off, and it was still pretty hard and I was jumping on it. I put it on my face, and as soon as I put it on my face, it just stuck to my face as soon as I went outside of the tent, and I packed everything up. That morning, after 2 hours of traversing with our sleds, pulling our sleds along, we got behind this little bit of an ice crater, and the guys had pulled out the olive oil, and they got that out, and they got their little bit of chocolate out, and they were having their break. And I was struggling to get this mask off my face because it was stuck to my face. And the guys are saying to me, "Come on, Pat, you have to hurry up. We've got to get going," And I was trying to peel this thing off from my ear. I couldn't get it around my ear and off. And in my haste, I was even trying to push some food up my nose, in through my nose, to get it into the back of my throat, because my nose had all icicles in it. It was difficult to get anything into there any other way. So what I ended up doing was I ripped the mask, and when I ripped the mask, all the skin came off the front of my face and my nose from one side to the other. Then my face started bleeding, and then the blood congealed and froze on my face straight away, and I could see this skin on my mask. I grabbed the olive oil, threw back as much as I could, and then I put the mask back on my face. And I have to tell you, for the rest of that day, my face just throbbed throbbed with pain. And I was in a world of hurt, and I was wondering, what the hell I was doing there. You have to keep in mind, I was only on day 10 of a journey that was going to take me almost 20,000 kilometres from one end of the earth down through to the other, and we were still in the North Pole, just on day 10 of a 39-day trek across the North Pole itself. And so, I was dealing with all of this. Then I just sort of pushed on. I got inside my tent at night, and I was thinking to myself, I was looking at the EPIRB, and I was thinking so much about just pressing that button and relieving this pain for good. And I'd come to the realisation that I would rather die than to quit. And I know that's not a good thing to say, and I know it's not a healthy thing for me to be speaking to your listeners about, but I was actually in that frame of mind. I felt so committed to where I was and what I was doing that I couldn't possibly give up, and I was more prepared to just die than that to happen. So with that in mind, I grabbed my satellite phone, and these things don't always work, as you would know, but this was a rare occasion, and I sent a message off to both my daughter and my son that were both in boarding school back in Australia, and I sent the same message to both of them. And the message simply said, "This is Dad. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I'm going through an incredible amount of difficulty with this run. I want you never to forget to be a leader, because the world is looking for people to lead. I love you. Goodbye." And that was all I sent in the message. I sent it off, and I didn't expect an answer. And I was thinking about just walking outside the tent, just laying down in the snow and just closing my eyes. I was just, it was just so incredibly painful. Then, like a miracle, I actually got a reply. And the reply came from my daughter, and my daughter sent me back a text message and said, "Dad, all of my friends are watching you. I'm watching you. We love you. We know you can do this. Please don't give up." And then I just started crying my eyes out. It brought me back to reality. What I had been contemplating was not just, it was a very selfish thing to be thinking about. But I was in that much pain, I didn't know any other way out. And then, as you would know, boys and girls are completely different. My son actually sent me back a message, and my son's message was completely different.
I'm intrigued with this one.
My son sent me back a message and said, "Dad, you're in the North Pole. Of course it's cold. Man up." And
Two different emotional responses.
Completely different. And they both listened to different things I'd told them over the years. But I could not believe my son. And I looked at this message and I thought, are you for real? Like, do you have any idea what I am going through? Any idea whatsoever? And I remember thinking so much about this thing. I just started to get more and more angry. And then as I got angry, I started to heat up. And as I started to heat up, the snow started melting from outside the tent, was coming through and inside the tent. So it ended up being like it was raining inside the tent. And I'm just getting more and more worked up. I'm going to give this kid a kick up the butt when I get home.
You're in the North Pole.
when I get home, and I went from not being able to deal with this, not being able to do with this, like I'm on a mission to make it through here just so I can get home and prove something to that boy. And that was exactly the kick in the butt that I needed. I instead of feeling sorry for myself, I just got on with the job, and as I say, 39 days later, made it through to Canada, and then pushed on from Canada, United States of America, Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Costa Rica, all the way down to Argentina, through the Darien Jungle and out the other side. The Darien Jungle was a very interesting part of the whole thing. I had 19 soldiers, which were part of a Special Forces unit that were put together, as escorts, combined by both the Colombian and the Panamanian governments to get me through there. And we went through the Darien and came out the other side into Colombia and pushed on through Ecuador and all the way down to the end. And then, of course, when I reached Ushuaia, I was flown across to Union Glacier And from there, hooked down around, grabbed my sled, hooked down around into Hercules Inlet and made my way up and into the South Pole. And the rest is history. 10 months later on, I completed what I set out to do, all because my son fired me up.
You know what, going back to that, that's what I say about emotions. You know, they're all positive if used correctly. You know, people look at emotions, they go, aggression, anger, they're all negative. I'm like, no, there's no such thing as a negative emotion. You make it the negative emotion. It's with your mind. It's actually going, right, listen, all your emotions are super positive because your emotions are you. It's a real positive trait to have them and to bring them out of this armory that we have. But it's just about using them, right? Using them to your advantage, you know, harnessing them in the right way to spur you on and to get you through that situation. And that's a great story, and one that I'm gonna use in the future, because that's a great example of emotional intelligence ultimately. After that experience and going, what makes you then want to punish yourself even more and run around Australia?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because for a lot of people the answer is just the cause, and you know, and I've actually used that as an easy way out. There's a lot of the time people will say to me, "Oh, why are you doing this?" And I'll say, "I'm doing this to raise funds for a charity. I'm supporting this," and they're happy with that answer and they go away. But if you dive a little bit deeper than that, there's so much more to us, all of us as human beings. And I suppose it comes back to my early childhood years, and that is that I just need to prove worth of myself. As I mentioned earlier on, you know, myself, I've listened to so many boxers and so many other different people that have struggled through life and then they've made it to the top. And it's really that struggle that has made them who they are. And consequently, they are continuously trying to prove themselves to themselves that they are worthy of the oxygen they breathe, the life that they live, the people they meet, and the opportunities that they have. And I'm no different to them. I'm continuously just trying to prove to myself that I was given this amazing thing called a life. And you don't even reflect on that until you have somebody very dear to you, very close to you, pass away. And then when they do, and especially when it's unexpected, you start to understand what a unique gift life itself is. And all the things that we take for granted are just so incredibly, incredibly important to us, and such a coincidence that we're even born in the first place. All the things that have to come together and just be perfect for me to even exist. And then, you know, that is not something that you should take for granted. And so for that, with that in mind, and the reflections on better people than me that have left this planet before I have, I just keep trying to prove to them and to myself and to whatever the higher being is that I deserve the oxygen I breathe, I deserve this life, I deserve this day, and every single day I try and make it count. And that's the driving force within me.
And that comes through the loss of your wife?
Yeah, a number of years ago, when my children were very, very young. And you know, we were both very young. And when something like that happens unexpectedly and you think that you are the weak link in the chain, and the one person that would be far better equipped to be able to lead your children through a much better life, to much better equipped to be able to deal with life itself, then you start to question, why am I left and they're gone? You know, nothing makes sense. And nothing ever makes sense when you lose somebody that you're close to. There's no sense in it at all. There's no sense. It's hard to find the sense in life itself, and just as hard to find the sense in death as well. But we continue to strive, or most of us, motivated people, continue to strive for the answers. And I don't know if we ever get the answers, but it's that continuous pursuit of the answer that drives us and keeps us moving forward. And that in itself is worthy enough of life.
Yeah, I think that continuous pursuit of of personal growth, of changing, evolving, learning, becoming a better version of who you are, knowing that you never get to the perfect version because that doesn't exist. It's the progression of gathering those small percentages along the way of becoming the best version of who you are now, knowing that tomorrow, the next day, that you can progress to become a better version, and also be able to pass that on to your children, to your loved ones, doing it for, for example, for your wife, having that purpose, internal purpose. All right, I just want to become the best version of who I can be. I think when you have an internal purpose like that, it's an achievable lifelong goal. It's a process that should never end, right?
Yeah.
Get out there, you try stuff, you commit, you learn, you grow, you become a better version. And because ultimately that's all we can leave behind is the best version of who we are to your family, to your loved ones, to your work colleagues, to the people that you surround yourself with. And that is a constant work in progress. That should never end, right? That should always be there and always give you that drive to push forward.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, it's interesting. My crew, who are very close to me, asked me with this last run that I did. They said, "How come you seem to manage that run so much easier than other runs that we've done in the past, that you've done in the past?" And I have to agree with them. I did manage it. It was difficult, but I did manage it so much better than anything I've done in the past. And I said to them, I was reflecting on who I was when I was a younger man and when I was doing all these races across America and through Vietnam and through India and all the other places around the world. And I was younger, I was angry, I was motivated, but I was angry, I was completely goal orientated and at the expense of anybody else around me, which is not a good way to be, because I was often rude and nasty to anybody else around me. I was so fixated on me and my goal that I wasn't pleasant to be around, but everybody tolerated that because they knew that the goal was so difficult to achieve that I was doing at those times. So I got away with it. And then I reflected on that in later years, and I didn't like the younger man that I was. But in this last run that I did, I thought about it in a lot more detail, and I understand now. I had to be that person because that was the best I could be at that time, and it was the most amount of tools that I had to deal with at that time that I'd accumulated to deal with at that particular time. But as we grow, you pick up more tools, more of an understanding about yourself and about other things, and you can add to the toolbox all the time. And so, I'm just in a state of mind these days where I can calmly still achieve the difficult things, whereas back then I had to be very aggressive. I had to be, very gun-ho.
And using what you had, like you said.
Yeah.
But also it's got you to where you are today, change, right? You look back and if people say to you, I might meet up with some people that I haven't met for 10 years, and they go, "Carl, and you've changed."
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a compliment to me. I'm like, yeah, I have changed. You haven't. That's why you're still just that they try and say it in a ditch. I'm like, I haven't seen you for 10 years. I hope I've changed. And when you see that change, when you look back and you go, oh, this is a person, actually, I don't, that's because you've changed. You're actually going in the right direction. You're heading in the right direction. Yeah. It's made you the person that you are today. So they're super positive traits, right? Because hopefully we're consistently changing. We're consistently growing. We're consistently evolving. So it's a process, again, that if you're not going through that, then you've probably hit a wall or something, or you think you're at that perfect stage, or you think, and then all of a sudden you go on autopilot. Well, I call it living in the void.
Yeah,
where you just it's like no.
You're existing, but
existing.
You're not. Yeah, you just exist. Yeah,
you're very humble because along the way you've raised millions of dollars for charities, for events, and this last race you done, which you're fresh out of, is you ran that for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice for Parliament. So from 2001 to 2010, you're a local politician. You get out of that, but subconsciously, I suppose, or accidentally, you find yourself stepping back into the political realm, but without being on that side. How did you come about thinking, right, I'm going to do this race. Obviously, you do it anyway, but I'm going to do it for this cause, and I'm going to give these people a voice.
Well, I keep reflecting on my past life, and when I do that, I realise that who I am today is the sum total of everything else I've ever done in my life. So I look back and I think to myself, well, why is it that I spent 9 years in federal parliament? What was the purpose of all of that? And I realised the knowledge, the experience that I got about the way the process, the way government works, the way politicians work, the way they think, the way that things get done, the process of legislation, constitution, all of those sorts of things. They're all very, very valuable tools, once again, for me to put into my toolkit. And that combined with my running experience, which is a great way of capturing people's attention and trying
platform.
to get and trying to get the media to sit up and pay attention to what I'm doing. So you combine the both together, and then you take on something that most people perceive as being beyond their belief, enormous, something that's worthy of, like, every moment it could fail, so we're going to watch it for that reason. And so hence the Run Around Australia. So it was a matter of combining all of those things together and saying, okay, I've got the perfect formula to be able to draw attention to this most important cause. And the most important cause for me was really highlighting the gap between the haves and the have-nots in this country. And that is our First Nations people, our Indigenous people that are living in absolute poverty and in some cases squalor and poverty in some of these communities. And yet they are a proud race of people that have an incredible history that dates back longer than any other civilization, continuous civilization, 65,000 years. And so I wanted to highlight the good and the bad of what they were going through. And so I had the perfect tool to be able to do that by doing this run. So
was all to expose. Sorry to jump in, but this was all ready for the referendum, right? This is all to get the word out there, to get people voting and to get people understanding, because along the way you were stopping off and doing everything that you needed to do to expose not only their way of living and their voice, but to expose them as a positive role in society, right? As in, right, listen, we all belong together. Let's get their voices heard.
Absolutely, 100%. So, there's some things I'm not in control of. I'm not in control of everybody's vote. I'm not in control of everybody's backgrounds of what they've experienced themselves. All I can do is show them what I'm seeing and try and get the message out there, and that's exactly what I did. So I spoke at functions almost every single evening. I went into communities. I spoke at those community meetings as well. As people would pull up in their trucks on the side of the road and come back and talk to me.
Australia, right?
I invited people to run with me. I had literally thousands of people run with me at different points, all the way around the country. Sometimes one or two people, and other times 100 or 200 people would join in. And there was literally thousands of people ran along with me. And I said to them, two things I want you to do. I want you to join with me, run with me, 1 kilometre, 500 metres, I don't care anything, or walk with me for a bit, just to show your commitment in action of how you feel about this. And two, to ask me any question that you want about the process, about how government works, about anything that might be out there. Because as we've already seen, both the media and the government, depending on whether you're part of the government or part of the opposition, can sway a message in one direction or another. So my role was just to educate people, and then they could make up their own minds from there. And that's exactly what I did. I spoke with people. I told them the pros and the cons of the whole situation, told them how it would work, how it would come together. I gave them the detail that they were looking for. And for those that cared to listen, those that cared to come along on the journey with me, run a little bit of the journey with me, or be at those community forums, they were very, very supportive. But, I can't get to 25 million people, but I did my best to get to as many as I possibly could. And consequently, I believe I made a big difference and a big impression on a lot of people's lives as a result of that. And more than anything, I highlighted the need and the concern to close the gap in this country, because I'd raised money for International Red Cross, and I'd done work for the International Red Cross, and I'd gone to places like Egypt. I've been in Vietnam, India, so many other Central America and South America, talking about clean water projects, clean sanitary conditions, things like that. And Australian businesses and Australians were so keen to get behind me. But what a lot of people didn't realise and didn't want to hear was that we have these own problems within our own country. And as my father used to say to me many years ago, charity begins at home. So, you've got to look inside your own home and see where you need to repair things, where things need to be improved before you can go out further than that. And so I was trying to make people realise that we have a real need and a concern here. And I'd like to think that I achieved that.
And how long did it take you?
This was 3 months worth of planning. It was 6 months worth of journey, so 80 kilometres a day every single day for 6 months.
80 kilometres a day,
yeah,
that's hardcore.
Yeah. And no days off. So most of my days were around 8 to 10 hours. Sometimes it was 12-hour days if it was a particularly difficult day, 12-hour days. And then on top of that, then I'd be speaking at functions, going into communities and speaking with people in communities as well. So, so it was that. Every day, there were no days off, and whatever the weather threw at us, there was dust storms, there was, like I say, snow, hail, rain. Sometimes it was mountains. I don't mind the mountains. I don't mind hills, to be quite honest with you. I much prefer those than a long, dead, flat course.
Takes your mind.
Well, yeah.
Think about where you're putting your feet. It triggers the mind rather, like you say, than a long road where you
same
automatically,
step.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The same step and the same stride. But also physically, and you would know this, that you're you're using when you're doing the same stride every single time, you're using the same lengths of your muscles, the same length of the tendons, and so you're not dipping into different lengths, and so your muscles actually fatigue faster over a dead flat course than they do when you're moving up and down and going up over hills or down through valleys and things like that, because you tend to use different lengths of your muscles, and you're working on the origins of the tendons a little bit more in those instances, and you're stretching out more. So even though it feels harder, physically it's better for you and you don't fatigue as quickly.
You get to the end of it, you're feeling elated, you feel like you got the message across, you feel like that this was a successful trip. One, that you finished it, two, that you've reached out to, you weren't just running, you were stopping off communities, talks, you were working around the clock basically to get the message out for the coming together of the nation, of the country. And then the referendum comes in, and was it 60-40 against it?
Yeah, basically.
Was that a kick in the teeth?
Oh yeah, it was a huge kick in the head. I felt like, I just, to be honest with you,
in shock.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't cry over much, but it brought a tear to my eye. Not for myself. For myself, it didn't matter. And for 97% of Australia's population, it's not going to matter one bit. And they all knew that. But for the 3% of Indigenous people, that, especially the ones living in remote and rural areas, for them, this was a chance of having some hope that there was a better future for themselves and for their children. And as I've said all along, when you take, without hope, you've got nothing. So, all anybody needs is a lottery ticket in life. And they've got something to hang on to. Maybe they might win. Maybe they might get ahead. Maybe something will happen. And that's all that they need to get from one day to the next day. And that's why I see so many people in poorer communities, they spend more on gambling and more on lottery tickets and things like that than anybody else, because they're just looking for some hope.
Yeah.
Some hope. Well, this was a message of hope for those people, that they would have a voice, that things weren't going to change instantly, but they may change for their children or their children's children. And so because they would have a voice on issues that concern them, that they would be able to get the messages through to the powers to be in Parliament of what is needed in their communities. Because for far too long, two things. One, when the Constitution was drawn up over 120 years ago, it didn't include Indigenous people. And basically they said that they didn't exist. And that was a shame. Now, that got corrected in 1967. They were counted as part of the population. But still, they needed to be included in the Constitution so that they were recognised as people, as the first people of this nation. And that was what we refused, which on the world stage is very, very sad. But one of the things that it did do, this whole process did do, was it highlighted the need and the concern for change and the need and the concern to be able to bring these people up to speed. So if we are going to keep the system the same, the Constitution the same, and we are going to say, well, this is about a oneness rather than division, or anybody being any different, then we need to make sure that everybody is at one, that everybody does have the same opportunities, the same choices for education, for health, for lifestyle, for job opportunities, for housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at the moment, that's not the case, but hopefully this has put a spotlight on that, and there will be the change that is needed. And I'll continue to fight for that cause.
Yeah, it's definitely ignited the spark, and it's definitely put something out there. And again, all we can do in life is keep feeding that, making that flame get bigger and bigger and bigger, because ultimately, you've certainly made a noise. And we look at everything, every negative, and we try and find the positive out of it. And you just highlighted it there and then. We've started something. The process is underway. The wheels are in motion. Yeah. Right. So it's a case of, so what's next for you before we wrap up? What's next for you, Pat? And what crazy adventures and and pain and suffering are you going to put yourself through now, or are you going to take your daughter's sort of advice and just go, Just chill. Or are you going to go with your son and go, get out there again and do something else? Yeah, look, till the day I die, I'll be doing something. And I've had this conversation with everybody, including my kids, that I don't want to die in an old nursing home somewhere where somebody's feeding me porridge out of a straw. I want to. That's not going to happen, Pat. I've spent an hour with you, and I can tell you right now that's not going to happen. I'll continue to do stuff with my life, and I have this simple philosophy, and perhaps your listeners can take this away as well. And it's this: that opportunities come along in our lives, you either take them or you live on regret. And I have absolutely no regrets about anything I've ever taken on to this point. So somebody throws me a challenge, I'll take it. Somebody gives me opportunity, I'll take it. So I'm just going to continue, as we said earlier on, continue to evolve, continue to learn more about myself, continue to try and inspire others to do the same. And who knows what's held for me in the future, but I'll just continue to move forward. Listen, mate, keep inspiring, keep being you, and keep committing, because when you commit, you learn, you grow, you become a better version of yourself, whether you get to the destination or not. And that way you live life with no regrets, because you've exhausted that option, you've done everything that you can, and I think that's a great way to live life with no regrets. And I have no doubt that you're going to continue through. And, especially for your son, prove him wrong. Prove him wrong. Keep on going. But listen, sounds like you've got a great family. Send my love and positivity to your children. Pat, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. I'm Ant Middleton, and my guest today was Pat Farmer. Thanks so much for joining me on Head Game. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our incredible stories. And leave me a review wherever you're listening. I'm Ant Middleton. Catch you again next time.